funny thing is that when I was in high school, they moved away when I was in about third grade. My dad was an accountant and continued to do his taxes. One day he brought them to the house and I was at home. I answered the door and I recognized him right away. He was not much taller than me and he was a very soft-spoken, gentle guy. And it just shocked me that, you know, as a child, I had this one view of him, but it was just one piece of what he actually was. And when I grew up and I realized he wasn't that, it was interesting.
Yeah. And as we go further along with fear, I think many of our fears will be that way. So what we're doing is we're introducing ourselves and telling one thing that we are afraid of back when we were a kid. So Jenny, what were you afraid of as a kid?
I think kind of what most young kids are afraid of is things that go bump in the night. You know, strange noises at night, because you knew then it was something under your bed or something like that. But it wasn't a big major fear.
Yeah,
but it didn't haunt me. It didn't keep me from sleeping or anything. But I still, I was afraid of things in the night.
Yeah, but all of that stuff is because both the night hides things, but also because your mind doesn't know everything, and so could that be right? I love that it's imagination as well. Sometimes when you learn too much, you no longer have the imagination to be afraid, right? And kids still have that imagination. Doris, how about yourself?
I think similar to Ginny's, I was, as a very young child, afraid of the dark. And when I had younger siblings who slept in the same room as I did, so I used having younger sisters in my room as a reason to keep a nightlight until I was into my teenage years. So, you know, I'm keeping it for them.
Yeah. Beth, good to see you. What's something you're afraid of?
As a child, I guess, probably that fear of darkness. I remember always wanting my door open when I went to sleep.
Yeah.
Something about having it shut just made me feel cut off, I guess, from the family or something. And I always, it gave me comfort to have the door, even if it was partially, you know, just ajar, a couple of inches, that made me feel better.
I think that's an amazing image, though, because when we deal with fear, it's often because it's somehow encapsulated us like that, captured us. And that's part of where it gets its power, isn't it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Scott, tell us about your fears as a child.
So when I was 4 years old, I was bit by a cat that had rabies.
Oh.
And had to go through the whole series of, I think it was 13 shots at the time. And somewhere in people talking about it, I had made the association that probably the cat, which was our domestic cat, had gotten bit by a skunk, because skunk were the common carriers of rabies there. So I had lots of nightmares about skunks, and that was a big fear for a lot of years.
Yeah, and part of what we're going to deal with in all of this is you have to go back to and you have to discover why it is that whatever it is put a fear inside of you. Sometimes it's for very good reasons. Sometimes it's for not so good reasons, but being able to figure that out helps a lot. Okay, so we're continuing. I'm asking each person to just kind of introduce themselves and tell us one thing they were afraid of as a kid. So Judith.
What came to mind was frightened that New York was going to get bombed in the war, because we had these dark out shades that we had to pull down, and also because my brother was killed a month after I was born in the war. So that was a big fear of mine as a little one.
Yeah, and anytime you have those really big events around you, it becomes easy to grow your fear about them, doesn't it? It becomes really simple.
Yes.
Good. Earl, tell us about one of your fears.
Well, the one I remember quite distinctly is Bambi movie. where he's running from fire through the forest.
Mm,
So I had a great fear of having to run from fire.
right. And one of the things you need to know about your fear as we go forward is that something like fire, you should have a bit of fear of fire. Fear is not necessarily wrong, but it does sometimes, you have to figure out how to not let it get out of control. Just like the fire you don't want to have out of control, the fear you don't want to have out of control. Judy, tell us one of your fears.
As a child,
Yes, as a child. We know that we're your fears right now.
not quite, honey, not quite. Gosh, I really can't think of anything specific, just a general, I don't even know how to, okay, I'm just gonna say it. I came from an abusive childhood, so I was generally in fear of my parents, I guess.
Yeah,
Sorry to put
that's a tough fear to carry, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Well,
that should be one of the
I've done a lot of
spaces.
work- I've done a lot of work on it, so I've
Yeah.
gotten to where I've dealt with it. But it was, it was a tough childhood. Just say that.
Yeah, but those places like that should be some of the saving grace in your life that become one of the fearful spaces. That does stand in stark contrast to what we wish.
And I remember one time my parents had a lot of political standing in the community too. And I remember I went to our pastor because I was really scared one time, and he went to my parents with it.
Mm, yeah.
So I didn't, I found there was just no safe place to go, which is why I've done a lot of research on resiliency issues and maltreated kids in my life. So,
Yeah, thank
Right.
you. So we're introducing ourselves and telling one of our fears from our childhood, and it doesn't have to be a big fear; it can just be a small fear, like like I said, the fear of girls. All right. So Nancy, coming to us from Nebraska, we got two Nancys, but we're going to start with Nebraska Nancy. Welcome back to St. Francis. Tell us one of your fears.
Thank you, Tim. I grew up on a big farm with 35 cows and one big bull, but I was the outdoor girl, and I loved to run up, climb the fence, and go in and pet the cows. Well, I learned how to get out of there fast. And
Because a bull is something you should be scared of.
yes. So that's mine.
All right. Thank you. Other Nancy.
I would say I was probably afraid of disappointing other people or not being good enough.
Yeah. Especially as we get into school and all the academic, as well as the extracurricular and all the stuff where we're placed beside someone else who's better or where we compare ourselves, that becomes really prominent, doesn't it? Yeah. Thank you. Melanie, how about you?
Well, those silly exercises to stop, drop, and get under your desk at school.
Yeah.
I think in first and second grade, I didn't get it.
Yeah.
But over time, I did, and then but I had a second grade teacher who was tremendously mean, and her face just seemed to be angry all the time, and I was afraid of her.
Yeah, that's tough, isn't it?
Yeah.
Joni tells this story. She teaches just right up the road here at right by Sabino Canyon at the school right there. And she tells the story about one of her kids coming up, and they had a lockdown and said, is this a number 1 lockdown or number 2? Because number 2 is animals, because they have things like a mountain lion or a bobcat will come on campus. And so they'll lock everyone down until they get the animal out of control. But the other is the lockdown because somebody's come on campus, something threatening. And all of those things where there's a possibility because, things have happened in other schools, do enlarge our fear,
Oh, I got it.
don't they?
I got it. Thank you so much.
All right. Pat, good to see you. Tell us one of your fears. We're talking about something that made us fearful in our childhood.
Oh, for me, it was both my parents were alcoholics. And so I always had that fear of them leaving.
Yeah.
That was probably the big one.
It's as you ought to have that fear, because we need those people around us, those parental figures.
Yeah, and
right?
they just weren't reliable.
Yeah, absolutely. Joyce, how about yourself?
Hi. Everything. People in general. I think snakes, especially that there could be, I grew up in an area of Wisconsin where there are basically no poisonous snakes that I know. Now, I don't know about now, but then there were no poisonous snakes. But I think my dad had PSDT, whatever it is,
PTSD
from the service. And one of the things, he had been stationed in Africa, and bugs and snakes and all that kind of stuff, and he still was looking for bugs and snakes at every turn. And so I inherited that fear of that no matter where you were or what you did, if you walked through a field, you had to really look, because there might be a snake in there.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was everything.
And those inherited fears are tough, because sometimes we don't even know why or how we got them. We just know that they sit there making us see the world very differently.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Thank you. Catherine.
Okay, no. Okay.
You're fine.
Okay, great. So, well, a couple of things. I was a city kid, and everybody else, including my older sister and my mom, had, lots of connection to the country and farms and stuff like that. So being the city kid, and I had cousins, all girls, who were also, raised that way, I was somewhat fearful of outdoor stuff and the animals and things, because I wasn't used to being around it. But I think the more overarching fear for me was that my father would stay at the tavern too late and would come home a little more, shall we say, mellowed out. And my mother would, of course, she ran things like a ship in a way. And if he didn't get home on her schedule or time, there was the proverbial hell to pay, and meal times were just chaotic then. Yeah. So I would eat quickly, but it was always with anxiety and fear that, this proverbial feces would hit the fan.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And it is interesting, isn't it, that many of our fears derive directly out of the situation we're in. And so something that I'm afraid of may just be because it's not in my environment, versus you're not afraid of it because it is everywhere around you. And so when dad is coming home late, you have a larger fear of what that might mean. So thank you for sharing. On around, Leticia, we're sharing one fear from our childhood and introducing ourselves. So Leticia.
Hi. Well, I was a pretty fearless kid. I think it was because I was chasing after older brothers and sisters all the time. But I had one event. My brother used to take me bow hunting with him. 8 years old, we went out in the desert, and he was killing rattlesnakes. That didn't bother me. We got caught in a blind canyon by a family of javelina. From that day forward, the fear was being trapped. And it translated really interesting because I was a violinist. Mom put a violin in my hand really early. And she used to, anybody come over, I had to be on display and play the violin for them when I was barely playing Twinkle Twinkle and couldn't hit the notes right. So it translated there. So being trapped in situations where I'm out of control.
Very good. Thank you very much. Arnie, how about yourself? What are you afraid of? Arnie, also known as Judy, the better looking, new, improved Judy.
Yeah, I'm using her computer.
All right.
So the only thing I could think of, had a great childhood in Brooklyn, was really at school. If I thought I knew the right answer on a question, being afraid to raise my hand.
Yeah.
And feeling intimidated, by the fact that I may have the wrong answer or look bad in front of other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are fears that many of us go through.
Yes.
Sharon.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Did I get the sound? Okay. Yeah, I guess as a kid, my dad was a really fearful man. He struggled all of his life with anxiety disorder. And I think I definitely have some of that myself. And as a child, the world seemed kind of fearful. I think I just heard a lot about things like that. For me, I had fear of abandonment, of being left places, which happened to me a couple times. One time I was at a wedding and my mom lost track of me and she took off to the reception and I was left behind, I'm sure it was an accident, I hope. I have a pretty deep sense of that. So probably because of some actual events and also just kind of, as I said, this sort of message that the world could be a fearful place that I learned.
And the truth of the matter is that all of our worlds give us reasons to be fearful. Fear is not in and of itself bad or wrong, right? The reason why a rattlesnake has that rattle is to cause a bit of fear in us so that we walk somewhere else instead of on top of them, right? And so that little bit of fear that the rattlesnake rattle causes in us is a good thing. The question is, what do we do with all that fear? Both good and negative. That's kind of what this class is about. I love the subtitle of the book, Essential Wisdom for Getting Through the Storm. How many know that in a storm, there are some things that you need to be fearful of, right? It might be the lightning that comes down and maybe could strike you. It might be the flood that's going to happen. In Arizona, that flash flood down our washes is a possibility. But we know that those kinds of things are not going to happen every time, and in all situations we need to be aware of them, but we need to put them in the larger perspective. So a lot of this class is about trying to figure out what is the larger perspective around whatever the fear is telling you, so that we use the fear to help us and not hurt us, not get in our way, not impede what we need to do. So right now we're dealing with a lot of fear in life, aren't we? In a lot of different ways. Being stuck in our own homes, not knowing what COVID-19 is doing out there can make that disease become a larger and larger beast in our life, right? How do we keep it in perspective and not overemphasize or underemphasize it? So we use the fear in the right way. How many have sometimes been told to ignore your fear?
Yeah.
It's a simple dysfunction that we tell each other. Why is that not helpful to us in most cases?
If you don't feel fear, you can't get yourself safe, and it could be an old fear, but then real fears, you don't know, get yourself to a safe place.
That's right. If you just ignore a fear, it means that you're not asking yourself, is it worthy or unworthy of your attention? If you just ignore it and walk past it, you may have missed an opportunity. There may be some reason.
I could tell you a story. I think it'll be quick. I was traveling in Europe with two friends. We were kind of the American backpacker. It was in, I don't remember what country we were leaving, but oh yeah, we were leaving Germany, I think for Italy. And there was an young American man. It was the only time we couldn't find a place to sleep, and only time we used a sleeping bag. So we slept on the floor of the train station in Heidelberg. And we woke up in the morning, and this American young man was there too. It was winter, and he was translating and telling us how all the people getting on the train were saying what a shame, you know, that these American girls are sleeping on the floor, because that town just totally rolled up the streets at 6 o'clock and nothing was open. So we went on to wherever we went, and at the end of the day, there he was at the train station again, and he wanted to, hey, I'll ride along with you all. We didn't, you know, my alarm wasn't up, but then he said, those trains in Europe, it's 3 seats facing 3 seats, but you can stretch them down to make 3 beds out of 6 seats. He wanted to crawl underneath the seats because he said he didn't have any money and he wanted to ride under there. And my 2 travel mates, we were all kind of like, ah, and the other 2 said, okay. And then I didn't feel good about that. And I called him outside the compartment and I said, we can't do this. I get it, he's an American, but I don't know if he's carrying drugs or what. So something made me, he didn't look scary, but anyway, we told him he had to go. So.
Yeah, and the thing of it is all of what you're talking about right there, Melanie, are things that have basis for fear or basis for change of behavior. We just in each moment have to solve through.
And we want to get it exact.
Yeah. All right. So I want to tell you what the very first line that struck me in this book. It says this: fearlessness is not only possible, it is the ultimate joy. So his goal in this is to move us from fear to fearlessness. Let me stop and make you compare 2 words that are very similar, and I think that we often equate. He didn't say fearless. He said fearlessness. What is the difference? If you're fearless, it means you act as if there is no fear there. You ignore the fear. You look past it. You don't take it into account. Fearlessness, I think, is a different attribute. Fearlessness is walking into the space where fear resides with a different attitude. Do you see the difference? You're not avoiding, you're not ignoring, you're not running away from, but you are choosing how to act towards that fear.
It's an acknowledgement.
It's an acknowledgement.
Yeah.
Fear is asking you to see and acknowledge something around you. And how many know that the person, one of the people that you live with on a regular basis, there's some reasons why you should be fearful of that person. Anybody else know that? It doesn't mean you shouldn't step into that relationship. It means that you should go into that relationship fearlessly, knowing that in spite of whatever is challenging or difficult about that person, and I mean the people that we love really well have things that are challenging and fear invoking in us, but that we move towards it because we see something larger than just the fear. Because that person is going to make it so that we want to run away sometimes. They're going to tell us, their lives are going to tell us something that is challenging, something that we hold on to. Rightfully challenging us, though. And if we just run from it instead of walk towards it, then we miss out. I think one of the bottom lines for me about fear is that if something is fear invoking to you, the only way to get rid of that fear is to walk towards, not walk away. Because if you walk away, it does nothing about the fear. And the next time you meet a similar situation, you have usually an augmented fear of that situation. The reason why, for example, Joyce, you're afraid of snakes, right? The snakes that you talked about, is because Dad told you to run further from them. Because of whatever he'd experienced, even though, like you said, those snakes in Wisconsin were not fear-worthy snakes. But because of his fear, he taught you to augment your fear, the fear that was inside of you. Yes, Leticia.
For me, dealing with anxiety made me face fear.
Uh-huh.
And we tend, anxiety, in my understanding, is an offshoot of something we fear. It's the emotional response to the fear. The only way I could get over my anxiety was to walk into that fear and face it.
Yeah.
Same thing that they teach you in karate and Zen, that you have to stand before it and be secure with yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. But you're getting ahead of us. Let me show you what we're going to be doing. Because that's important stuff, but let me show you kind of the process of how we're going to do things. Here's the book. In a second, I'm going to ask you, I can't see right now, so don't answer it now. But if you don't have the book, I'm going to try to teach this as if nobody has the book. I know some of you do, which is great. If not, I will help you through this. So next week, we will talk about the first 2 chapters, A Time Before and Original Fear. And you can see we'll work through 2 chapters a week, unless that becomes too much. You guys get to determine, is that a working amount, or does it feel like we need to do it faster or slower? Whatever you'd like, that's what we'll go through. So we should be finished by mid-July, you can see. Throughout the sessions, we will be using the back of the book. At the back of the book, there's a series of practices that are there that are wonderful, and we'll be using some of those practices as we go forward. But today, we're just going to do this introduction about fearlessness. All right? Which means that we're going to have to figure out what it is that puts fear there and figure out how to walk towards it. Here's what he says. The only way to ease our fear and to be truly happy is to acknowledge our fear and look deeply at its source. If we are fearful or we are fearless so that we don't really look, then we miss the opportunity to acknowledge our fears and look deeply at its source. Joyce did a good job acknowledging that her fear of snakes came from her dad's fear of snakes. Where does your fear come from? What is it that's causing you in this moment to have fear rise? it may be a true thing. If the rattle on the snake is shaking, then I should be fearful. But the other day I was running on one of the paths that I run on all the time. In fact, it was right by where I'd fallen a couple weeks before that. So maybe I had a bit of fear anyway because of that fall, but there was a big snake right across my path. And my first thought was rattlesnake. And it wasn't, but you have to figure out, okay, here's this snake. Should I be fearful, or do I just turn around and run away? As I moved towards it, I realized, nope, it's not a poisonous snake, but I also didn't want to step right across it, so I kind of went off the path and around it. You have to figure out the appropriate way to address each thing. And see it for whatever the positive is, not just for the negative that you feel in the moment. So from all of those things from before, what is something right now that is causing fear to you? What is something you don't understand?
Nancy?
Nancy.
Thank you. I'm in an assisted living and independent living senior center here in Omaha. And it has not been hit any of the residents, but employees have. So my daughter said, Mom, you're coming to live with us until this is over. And I agreed. But what my fear is for all those there and what they may experience, I check in daily, and so far nobody, but there is that fear.
Right. And COVID-19 should put a little fear in all of us, right? There's reasons to be fearful of it, right? Just yesterday, Kathy, our director of the International School for Peace, they're back in session with very limited number of kids because these are essential workers who need some place to take care of their kids. And so Kathy's open with that. But she's also dealing with her own mother who was in a care center that had some possibility of COVID. So she brought her into her house, has been caring for her at home, but has multiple issues that are difficult for her. And she's trying to figure out how to balance work and care. And she was about to bring her back when all of a sudden a case was reported in that care center. So what does she do now? How does she proceed forward? That fear that's right there is important because it is something that is deadly. But how deadly and why? How do we react to it? How about the rest of you? What's fear invoking right now?
I have a fear.
Yes.
I have a fear that there's a portion of the country, people, that are not taking this virus seriously enough. If you looked at some of the videos that they showed on TV, like in Missouri, in Ozark, Missouri, in that pool, overcrowded, no social distancing, just no, of course, no masks. And, I think it's become political because they're getting their cue from the President of the United States. And I think most of the people that don't follow the basics, social distancing and wearing masks, are Trumpites. And that's even caused problems in my own family.
Yeah.
Where there is a person that's a Trumpite, and it's caused havoc in the family. Yeah. Because he doesn't believe, he just follows whatever Trump says. And, it's really scary that the virus hasn't gone anywhere. It's just like Cuomo says. I'm a big follower of Andrew Cuomo. He said that the virus has not gone anywhere. The reason that the curve has gone down in New York is because of the actions of most New Yorkers.
Yeah.
He said, I could tell the next day, if you tell me that people are going to act a certain way, then that curve's going to go back up again.
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
people are acting like the virus has suddenly disappeared.
Yeah.
It hasn't disappeared, but that's why I'm fearful of the second wave.
Sure.
Because people are becoming too cavalier and not following just even the basics, you know? So.
What I hear you saying, Arnie, is that's the difference between fearless and fearlessness, right? People are just saying, I'm not going to be fearful. I'm just going to go and do.
Right.
But there's a certain amount of cautiousness that we should have. What is the right action, not just what is the easiest action.
Right.
Right? Leticia.
I'm fearful, and it's not that I'm not practicing social distancing or being cautious of other people, but I'm dealing with a 91-year-old mother that lives by herself that has been glued to a limited amount of information, that this woman was just a pistol until Corona hit. And she's living in a real fear-induced life that she won't even go outside and tend her garden right now because she's so afraid. So I get what you're saying, but I'm seeing it in both directions.
Right.
And especially for my mother, her 100-year-old friend, and her peers that are in their 90s and 100s right now, they're immobilized.
Right.
And that's not right either.
And I think that's what Thich Nhat Hanh is trying to help us to do, is figure out how to not let our fears kill us in some way or another. And I don't mean physically harm us as much as whatever it is that stops us from being the full people we ought to be. Because fear can help us towards that fullness, but often stands in the way of that fullness. But to do that, he cautions that we have to be careful not to just kill our fear, because it's also there for a reason. And if we don't deal with it, then we, in some ways, allow it to enlarge and become stronger in our life. Where have you seen that in your life? That you let something, or people around you let something become more and more of a power over them? Yes, Doris.
Mine is a little more personal than our global situation, but I injured my foot last November, and it took several months for it to get better, and it was finally better the last month or so. And the way that I deal with some of my anxieties is to go out and walk for a few miles. And then last Sunday, I re-injured my foot, and so now I can barely walk down the hallway. And I know that it's a small thing in the broad scope of a 70-something-year-old body to have just one foot that hurts, but it's kind of overpowering my life right now. And it makes me fearful of, you know, is it going to get better or isn't it?
But I think, Doris, that's a really good example, because I've done the same type of things as I've injured or overstressed something. It's sometimes not that you bring on the injury you're worried about, right? Because you should be careful of, okay, how do I make sure that I don't continue that injury? So I sit on the couch and get 20 pounds overweight, and I bring on a whole different other thing. Does that make sense? It's in running away from our fears, sometimes it's what else do I bring in or allow to become normal that happens there, right? So maybe you protect one piece of you, but at the expense of what? Margie.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what I'm feeling just in the past week or two, I don't know if I would call it fear exactly, but it's anxiety about, I think many of my friends and myself kind of adjusted to this situation, but as it keeps going on longer and longer than we all thought, there's the, you know, there's a fear or anxiety about, well, when is this going to end? How's it going to end? What's going to happen? And like Arnie was saying, if some people are following, you know, what we're being told we should do and other people aren't, then that's going to make it worse and more people will die. And, you know, it kind of goes on and on.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to do is when I find myself kind of getting caught in that, what's going to happen, I just pull back and realize, you know, I don't have control of the people that are listening to somebody that I don't agree with.
Yeah.
I don't have control of somebody who's already sick and dealing with that. All I can do is focus on where am I right now and where are my friends and how can we be okay in this moment, and whatever comes, comes, and you deal with it when it comes. And I'm just trying to kind of keep going back to that when I recognize it.
Thank you. Thank you. How about the rest of you? What is it that's fear invoking? Susan, I'm gonna unmute you here. Okay, go ahead.
There's another Susan, right? Am I hooked in?
Yep, you're hooked in now.
Okay. Oh God. So I missed the introduction at the beginning, so I don't know if we can talk about just anything.
Yes,
or...
anything you want.
Okay. Well, the hard part for me is politics, you know, and I feel guilty because maybe everybody, you know, of course everybody thinks differently, but the politics that I believe in are, you know, they're all being shredded right now and you can't get away from it. It's in the newspaper, it's online, everybody's talking about it. I'm just saturated and it's affecting my blood pressure, which is really, you know, they can't get my blood pressure under control. So, I mean, I'm afraid. I'm afraid our country will be ruined. I'm afraid for the world I'm leaving my grandchildren. I'm afraid for how far our president's going to go with his craziness. And I'm also afraid that we have no good candidates to oppose him. I'm going to get obsessed. It's just this going down the rabbit hole. I always talk about, it feels like you go down the rabbit hole. You start up here and then you start thinking these thoughts and pretty soon you're way down the rabbit hole going crazy and your blood pressure is out of control.
That's right. And the difficult part about that is that, okay, how many have your screen set up so you see all of us, or how many have it just to see just the speaker? If you go up to the corner, there's a button that you can push that says gallery view or speaker view. Click that so you can see all of us.
I think I can see everybody.
There's 19 of us.
More.
How many know there's at least one person in that bunch that you should be afraid of?
I think it's
for a lot of different reasons.
I'm afraid of you, Jim.
We think it's you.
It might be. And when it gets to politics, which literally means many ticks, you should be afraid of ticks. We get into those spaces where there are fear-invoking things because it's where we interact as human beings. And when we interact with human beings, sometimes toes get stepped on, feelings get hurt, elbows get thrown, right? And so there's deliberate ways that we scare each other, as well as some of the ways that are just challenging for us to figure out how to understand that other person and their reaction to life. Now, it doesn't mean that that's bad how they're challenging us, because sometimes those people that are challenging us actually draw us towards a better self. It doesn't mean that it's not difficult to go that direction. So I have the love of my life is this little girl named Alicia. She's 7 years old now. I've known her since the day she was born. And she just fills my heart with joy. And her mama fills her heart with fear. I love Addie too, that's the mom. But Addie is fearful and teaches Alicia easy how to be fearful. When she was 4 years old, we were climbing on equipment together, playground equipment together, and it was early morning, and so it was kind of a little chilly, and there was a bee there that, because it's a cold-blooded creature, was just very immobile. So we could walk right up to it and look at it. And her first reaction is, Mama says, I'm afraid. No, I said, that's Mama is afraid. I said, but not you, you're a brave girl. And so she came up and we looked at that bee together. So what are the stories that keep you fearful of stepping towards that bee? What are the things you've been taught somewhere in your past that's told you one story versus what are the other stories? And when it comes to those inner relationship things that we do, what is it that somebody else invokes in you? When you look at the different faces on the screen, what is it that you see in somebody that invokes one particular reaction? It may have nothing at all to do with that person, right? It could be that somewhere back in time, you met somebody else who looked something like that, who had some of the same similarities, who wore the same shaped glasses, whatever it happens to be, and you're reacting to that other person as if this person is the same. And how do you face that fear? Well, you have to go and recognize that this person is not whatever it is you're fearful of, or this situation is not whatever it is you went through before. And you have to figure out how to move in this space, not that space. But you have to deal honestly with this, because you have to acknowledge that something about this place or this person or this situation is invoking a fear that might be well-founded. How many know that some of your friends that think differently in their politics are worth being a little fearful of? But maybe not only fearful of. What else is there? Leticia.
One of the fears that the whole Corona thing has brought to me is that we don't let go of politics when we're talking about saving people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And ultimately, if we hold that image of how do we save each other's life, and I don't mean that you're about to fall off a cliff, I mean how do we help each other's lives be enhanced in every moment? And how do we allow that other person to enhance our lives, even in the ways that they are fear-invoking to us? Can I face that fear and somehow still glean from that interaction what will help me the best in becoming more of myself, fuller person in that moment? I think that's what Thich Nhat Hanh is going to draw us towards, is that in every interaction, every situation, there is something there of value and power for us. And in spite of the fear, that's what we want to try to glean somehow or another. Why don't you do that? Because when you don't, one of the things he says, if we don't acknowledge and look deeply with our fears, we can draw dangers and accidents to us. That we actually are participants in drawing some of that negativity into our environs. How do we make sure that we don't do that? We have to face. We have to look at. We have to live in the space of fear and do that without judgment. Because something that is invoking fear in us automatically makes it so that it's easy for us to put a judgment on them. Right? And as soon as I put that judgment on, then I make it harder for that to be a blessing. We go back to Joyce. Dad put judgments on her snakes in her life. Now, it had nothing to do necessarily with Joyce's own experience. It had to do with the power of whatever Dad had said. But what fears have you carried from your parents that said certain things could only be viewed certain ways? My mama was a well-intentioned person and just a blessing most of the time. when we moved down to Texas, we moved into an area that was more than 50% Hispanic and about 10% African American, and I, as an Anglo, was a minority. And my mama said, you don't want to date certain people, meaning mostly the color of skin, right? Because, right? And she put her judgment into my life, and I had to decide, is that a true statement? Is that a true fear or not? But she'd been taught things from her parents, and she passed those. We inherit those as we move forward. We have to decide, are we watering the seed of fear in another person? Are we allowing someone else's fear to water us and make something grow in us? So think about your mom and dad specifically and something they taught you that you chose to reject. Tell me why. What was it that you moved beyond? I saw a great thing today, and Earl, this is going back to what Sandy sent to me. Sandy sent me a wonderful little piece. It's a devotional piece, and in it says, to grow requires us to outgrow. Isn't that a great line? To grow requires us to outgrow. And if I just take everything that my mom and dad gave to me and just put it in place, then I haven't outgrown. What is it? What are the fears that they gave to you that you have to move beyond, become better than? Tell me some of them you're outgrowing.
This wasn't exactly phrased as a fear, but my mother was a very gregarious, outgoing person, and she always wanted me to be more like that. And I'm basically an introverted person who, I'm very shy, and I don't like to be outgoing towards other people. And I always just felt like I was lacking in that department. There was something wrong with me that I was always alone or preferred to be alone. So I've come with two things that I've done over my adult years is one, make friends with that alone part of myself. It's all right to want to be alone sometimes and to bail on
and then not have to be mom.
Yeah.
Right.
And also, it's all right to put yourself out there every now and then.
Right.
So.
Thank you. Anyone else?
My mother was afraid of what the neighbors would think. This is Judith. And I, of course, haven't, went 180 degrees about that. I don't care what the neighbors think of me.
But that's because she was working out of one set of fears, and because of whatever she gave to you, you're working out of a different set of fears.
Well, plus opposing my mother.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Which is what we often do. I used to tell the couples that I was marriage counseling for, right, as they were getting ready for their wedding day, I used to say, if you want to know what your partner's going to look like, look at their parents, because many times we're either exactly the same or we're the exact opposite. Right? Because we work out of who that other person was, often because of their fears and our fears. How about the rest of you?
Nancy, my mother's family and my father's family had a great fear of being heavy and fat. And they put that on us.
Yes.
My father had been called Fatty through his school years. And I've just been going through my journals, and every single journal page has how much I weighed that day, what I ate. In other words, I was programmed
That's right.
into caring and fearing fat.
That's right.
And I let go of it, and actually had help with this from another She was a professor who was very overweight, and she helped me let go of that prejudice against fat
Good.
and fear.
Part of what you're talking about is what Thich Nhat Hanh calls original fear. We do inherit some of our fear like that, and we have to figure out how to read the script differently.
Yep.
Thank you. Catherine, you had something to say.
Yeah, I think there's several things, but mainly it's around, my mother was so critical of other people and judgmental. And I think that I have been always concerned that I not channel that. And unfortunately, there are times when I am pretty sure that I've been channeling my mom.
Yeah.
And so I try to listen to what I'm saying, and I try to ask myself, do I need to have an opinion about this? And can I see something other than judgment in something that's occurring if it's with friends or family?
Yeah.
Is there another side to this story or what I'm seeing? And it's not always easy, but I observed her criticisms and her judgments as being very harsh, as being very hurtful to people. And I think that's probably what helps me try to deal with it, is that I don't want to be hurtful or cause that kind of reaction in others. And I think that it's off-putting, and I think she missed out on things. And that's the other thing, is I think that this setting up this dichotomy between oneself and other people is so separating. It's not joining or connecting at all.
Yeah. Susan, you were saying something. You wanted something to say.
I'll just be quick. I think there's probably some people here that were raised by parents who lived through the Depression. And while we're talking, it just makes me realize how that was like the cornerstone of my life. It wasn't ever acknowledged. It was the elephant in the room, but my family focused on finance, unconsciously. And it was just a big deal. Having lived through the Depression was a brutal thing to them. I mean, it was really a big wake-up call about, how your life can change overnight. And so I know I inherited a lot of that. And I know now I realize how much anxiety I caused my parents because I didn't follow what they wanted me to do for financial security. I went to college, I was supposed to marry a doctor, then they could be free of me. And that didn't happen. I wasn't interested in marrying a doctor. I wanted to travel all over the world, even if I didn't have any money. And I must have caused them so much stress.
Yeah.
Because here I go again. There's a good-looking doctor over there, and she wants to go to Italy. So I caused them a lot of stress. And I think financial insecurity is a huge cornerstone in my family. I passed it on to my kids, and it's something I'm aware of, especially. All right, that's it.
All right. Here's the really good news, is that today we haven't solved every fear you have, but in 7 weeks, all right, we will do the best we can about helping each other to be as strong as possible to deal with not just the fear of this moment, but the ongoing struggles that we have to try to figure out how to take fear and turn it not into the enemy it often feels like, but into that which will strengthen us and move us towards more of a fullness of self. Don't forget that if you have not given me your email address, will you type it into the chat box? Does anyone know how to do the chat box? Down along your bottom line, there's a thing that says chat, and if you click on it, then a thing will come up, and on the bottom of it says type message here. Just give me your email address, and I will send out different papers. Here's what I'm going to send out to you this week. I will send you a copy of this sheet of paper, which is just some of my favorite quotes and some questions about those quotes. All right, so that you've got that. But in addition, what I will do is this. I have the first 5 chapters of the book photocopied like this and digitalized. You will, how many don't have a book?
I don't.
Okay, if you don't have the book, then I will send you these so that you can read them. I want to show you what they're going to look like. So let me show you this. Oops. Where is it? Okay. So it's going to look something along these lines. Oh, sorry.
Uh-oh.
I got Facebook.
Sorry, I've got a thing that makes it so that I can't quite see my screen, so I've got to move things back and forth. Oh. Okay. I'm going to do it a different way. When you get the document, can you see this right here? These PDF files will come up. Those are the files you're going to read. And when you click on them, it'll come up, it'll look this way.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
How many read sideways? Is that okay? Everyone can read sideways? All you need to do is right here at the top, do you see this button right here that I'm focusing on? If you just click that 3 times, it'll be where you can read it. Or you can go over here and you can print them out if you would like to. Whatever seems to work easiest for you. But those are the next 3 chapters. So, excuse me, the next 5 chapters. So you'll be ready not just for next week, but for the week after. Okay?
Great.
Read and think and just meditate on the fears that are in you, the fears that are around you, the ones that you have to deal with either because you caused them or because someone else is causing them in you. And as we move through this, I think we'll help each other feel stronger in the midst of the storm, whatever the storm is. All right? Thank you very much for your time. Know that
Thank you.
Know that I'm recording this and it'll be on the website underneath this. So if you miss any of the sessions, you'll be able to go and be able to catch up. Okay?
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody. Nice.
Don't forget to put your email address.
Hi, everyone.